Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Sorry for the little delay in streams there. I think last August was my last upload for A&P1, but we're back into it now, and hopefully we can get through the rest of this series without any more interruptions. All right, so we ended with the introductory stuff. Now we finally get into the heavier A&P stuff. So the first section here, we're going to split it up into three parts, is on the tissue. So the first one we're going to do is epithelial tissue. Yeah. So epithelial tissues are part of the linings and coverings of a lot of the tracts in our body. And they also are part of the glands in our body. So let's jump right into this now. So just as a quick overview here of the different tissue types and how these next three parts of these videos are going to be laid out, today we're going to be talking about the epithelial tissues. There are three other types we're going to talk about in this series as well. The first one, the next one being the connective tissue here. So connective tissue is another big one. Why is the pen acting funny? There we go. So this is going to be a longer one. This is going to be part 2. And then muscle tissue and nervous tissue is going to be part 3. I'm also going to talk a little bit about membranes there as well. But today the focus is on epithelial tissue and how we break down the different characteristics. So the characteristics of epithelial tissue, one is polarity. So it has a sidedness to it. It has an apical side, which is an upper side, and a basal side, which is the lower side. So it has different functions at the apical side and the basal side, and we're going to see that as we're going through the different tissue types today. So the apical side usually might be ciliated, and the basal side is typically connected to something called the basement membrane, and that's an area of connective tissue, which we'll talk more about in part 2. So another characteristic of epithelial tissue is its regenerative capability. So it can regenerate very quickly. So epithelial tissue is found in the linings and tracts of most of our systems. So our skin is considered an epithelial tissue. It's also part of our glandular network as well. So our sweat glands and our mucus secreting glands, which we'll talk about later too. So polarity, regenerative, and also it is avascular, meaning it has no blood vessels in it. No blood vessels in it is avascular. Also, it is innervated. Innervation means it has sensory nervous system fibers in it. So avascular, but innervated. So these are some of the key characteristics here of it. Now, how do we label these? So they are labeled based on one. So these are all different cell types. So how many layers are there? So this is layers. And then cell shape is over here. So one layer is termed simple. Multiple layers is termed stratified. Now, if the cells are flattened in shape, it's called squamous. If the cells are cube-like in shape, it's called cuboidal. And if they are column-like in shape, they're called columnar. So you can have simple squamous or stratified squamous. Now, the stratified ones are labeled based on the uppermost layer. Because the layers going down here, this could look a little bit more cuboidal, but it's the upper layer that matters. So then cuboidal, simple cuboidal, stratified cuboidal, then we can have simple columnar and stratified columnar. Then there's one more over here that's pseudo-stratified. So pseudo, EU is equal to false. So this is false layered. So this looks like multiple layers when you're looking at it in a histology image. So histology is the study of tissues, and that's all we're going to be looking at in this chapter. But it's still one layer. And now the rest of this talk, we're going to be showing examples of each of these. So here, the first ones are the simple squamous. So one layer of flattened like cells. The most popular spot we find these are in the lung alveolar sac. So we can see these linings right here. The alveolar sacs are expanding and lining. It needs to be a thin layer so that CO2 and oxygen can easily go through into the capillary bed. So all the capillaries are in these regions in here, and so the air is in here expanding outwards. I know this color is hard to see here, but then that gas exchange goes through that simple layer of squamous cells. Next one then are our stratified squamous. So layered, the multiple layers, and flattened like. Remember, again, it's labeled based on its uppermost layer here. And this histology image here is of the esophagus. So up here we have all these simple squamous cells and then lots of layers going down. So they start growing down here and work their way up. It does the same thing in the skin. So now we go to the cuboidal ones. This one is simple cuboidal. So one layer of cube-shaped cells. The most popular spot we find this is in our kidney tubules, where we have our sites of water reabsorption and sodium reabsorption or excretion. So this is a cross-section. So if the tube is going like this is a cross-section of that tube. So we're looking at it like this right here. And here we can see that layer. So remember, the stained spots are the nuclei. And that's what you want to look for when looking at these histology images. You want to find where the nuclei are. And then look at the shape of the cell membrane. So then this is the cell membrane around that nuclei. And here you can see how they have that cube shape. It's not as pretty as the artwork, as the art images you see, the art models. So looking at histology slides can be tough, but it gives you a good idea of what that tissue type is like. So now we go to stratified cuboidal. So remember, this is layered cube-like. These ones are rare. And these ones I kind of chat about with stratified columnar, because a lot of times they're mistaken back and forth. Not really mistaken back and forth. It's just they can be labeled as each sometime. One example here is the parotid gland. So here you might say they're layers of cube-like cells. Over here they might look a little bit more column-like. So here we'll talk about, or even a single layer. So it's a little more back and forth, and it kind of depends on where that tissue slice happens. So again, these are rare. They're in some glands and so forth. So this is just showing an example of where you might see some stratified cuboidal. And then here, this is a popular one in our small intestine. Simple, so one layer of column-like cells. That's not a cube, that's a column, trust me. So here we can look. So right here is the cell membrane. And then right here is a column-like cell, and this is little cilia on the top that are beating. So one thing you want to note here, because we're going to be comparing this to the pseudostratified columnar later, these nuclei are roughly in the same line. And that's kind of what you want to look for. And right here is an interesting cell I want to point out too. This is called a goblet cell. So this is secreting little vesicles packed with mucus out to the intestinal space here. The protein is called mucin, and that's what forms your mucus. And so wherever you see goblet cells, just think of a mucus secreting cell. So we find that in things like the trachea, small intestine, and so forth. A lot of different places of the body we find these goblet cells secreting mucus. Now we go back to the stratified columnar. Again, these are rare, just like the stratified cuboidal. And here I'm showing that same image of the parotid gland, because some of these could be considered a layered of stratified columnar, where this upper one is a column-like, and remember, it's labeled based on its uppermost layer. And then this one's maybe a little bit more cuboidal-like down there. Now, the pseudostratified columnar, this example is from the trachea. So pseudostratified, remember, means false layered, and it's column-like. And remember, I mentioned how the nuclei were lined up. Here, the nuclei are kind of everywhere in this region. They're more spread out. Some are down here, or some are up here. This is still one layer. So this is a column cell here. This is one there. They're just a little more pinched and spread out. That's because a lot of these, there are these goblet cells in here. So right there's another goblet cell. And sometimes they cause the nuclei to move to the side and come out of that typical line. And these ones are also lined with the cilia right here. So the cilia and the trachea are really important. They're like an escalator that helps move the mucus out of your lungs. An example of where this is a problem is in smokers. So the smoking actually destroys these cilia. So that's why smokers cough so much, is because they're trying to get that cilia out of the respiratory tract. Now, another fun one to talk about that I didn't list earlier, this is known as transitional epithelium. This is when we have a mixture. It could be either or. So this is in organs that have a lot of stretch. The main one here is the urinary bladder. So here we see cuboidal cells and squamous cells. So it's a mixture, and they can change their shape depending on how full that organ is. So when the bladder is empty, the cells would be more long, more cuboidal, or even in some cases column-like. Then when your bladder fills, it stretches. So the filling would be a force pushing this way on from the internal area here. That force pushing outward causes those cuboidal cells to squish down, and when you look at it then, it's more squamous-like. So it is stratified, but it can vary between columnar to cuboidal to squamous depending on the distension or stretch of that organ. The bladder is the main example for that one. And the last thing I want to talk about, because it's part of the epithelial tissues, are our glandular epithelia. So the glandular epithelia include both the exocrine glands, these are external ones, such as our sweat glands, and our endocrine glands, which are the internal ones, and these ones secrete most of the hormones. I could talk about this a little more, but I'm not going into great detail here. Just know that the glandular epithelia include like the goblet cells, which are the mucus secreting cells, so they can be unicellular. The goblet cell is unicellular, or they could be multicellular, like some of the sweat glands and more advanced mammary glands and so forth. But the glands, anytime you hear a gland that's secreting something, it's either exocrine or endocrine, it's part of the epithelial tissue. All right, that is all I have for that. So we talked about the glands, examples of different tissue types. And if you're studying this, you want to get used to looking at these histology slides and not the artistic representations. Know where you can find these epithelial tissues, because trust me, when you're studying these systems later, like when you're studying the lung alveolar sacs and you're like, oh, simple squamous, that means gas can easily move through, it'll help you understand that better. So I stress that with my students all the time, of the importance of studying this tissues chapter. All right, so next time we're going to talk about just connective tissue. That's going to be a long one in itself, and then we'll break down muscle and nervous tissue and membranes later. With that, thank you guys for coming by, and see you all next time. Hello again. Thank you for watching my video. I'm glad you could come by. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to do that thing where you like and subscribe. Also, if you're interested, I prepare and record all of these videos live on Twitch. After the recordings, we do a post-recording question and answer section, and then sometimes I play games where any question is fair game as I game. Also, on Twitch, I'm a co-founder of a wonderful community called the Knowledge Fellowship, or TKF. Our goal is to seek and share knowledge with others while live streaming. We feature streamers who cover biology, law, physics, chemistry, geology, photography, health and fitness, psychology and mental health, rocket science and aeronautics, programming, and tons of different practical EDU streams. Feel free to check out TKF at the link in the description and join the very active Discord community. Hopefully, find something that interests you. With that, I'll see you all next time, and have a wonderful day. And remember to seek knowledge and challenge everything.